Hello, and welcome to Feedback episode 48. Today we're joined by David Bithell and percussionist Aiyun Huang. Thank you both for joining us. Today's a really special episode. The work that we've done with David, we were just talking off camera before, goes way back to 2007. I don't even know how old we were then. And, it was really significant to us back then and continued, through to today. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Aiyun. Thanks.
Thank you, Russell, and very nice to see you, Ian, and David, who I've seen quite a bit over the pandemic. It's nice to have this discussion here. So today we'll be looking at two pieces. The first one dated back to 2007, Whistle from Above. So this comes from a time before the age of Young and Wire, when Ian and Russell were working together as a duet. Can you tell us a little bit about the background or the story behind the commission? Maybe, Ian, would you like to take that?
Sure, although I think Russell might have a little bit more insight. I know that Russell and David knew each other from Berkeley.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
And I think Russell was just like, we should play a piece of David's. But you probably have more insight than that. That's my understanding of it.
I mean, you're totally right. I knew David back when I was an undergraduate and you were a grad student, and we were hanging out and always chatting music. And then when I moved out to Stony Brook, Ian and I started playing together as a duo. We called ourselves hunter-gatherer, always sticking with one noun in every project, maybe with a slash. So hunter-gatherer was kind of a duo project. Actually, we commissioned another piece by another composer that's been on this series, Aaron Einbond, for a piece as well. But yeah, I don't remember how it came up, but David, we were talking, and did you approach us or did we approach? I don't know. It feels so natural that it came to be.
Yeah, and natural and 13-14 years ago as well. So there was such a just a relationship that existed musically and friendship, that it was, as you say, kind of just natural that something would happen. I had, at that point, I think I had been teaching at the University of North Texas in the composition and music technology program there, and had, I think part of, or some of the genesis of it was sort of two parts. There was a sort of a theatrical / musical side of an interest that I wanted to sort of develop with this piece. And then there's also some technical sorts of things and technological sorts of things that I was starting to play with. Mm-hmm. And some of those things became, the resources that I was working with at the university. I started playing more with some do-it-yourself style hardware electronics, and wanting to integrate that into a percussion world to exaggerate and emphasize some of the theatricality. And that was certainly, theatricality has been a sort of an important underlying theme in most of my musical work, and certainly at that stage, it was really the core of what I was thinking about. And so, yeah, it became then just sort of moving from knowing the two of you. Actually, Ian, I think I kind of met you through this collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so, but knowing Russell going into that, and then getting to work with you, Ian, in that it became kind of clear that the type of expression that was possible on a theatrical side was really well matched with the duo that the two of you as performers.
So we have put together an excerpt of this piece. It's about 6 minutes long, and after that, I'm sure we'll have more questions. So, Rob, please. So for those of us who just joined us, what you just heard was Whistle from Above from 2007 for two percussionists, robotic instruments, staging, lighting, and computer sounds by David Bithell. So David, I have a few questions. So when I was reading the score, you talked about the robotic instruments in this piece. Can you tell us a little bit what that is? So before, maybe I need to back up a little bit. So I think this piece sort of has your signature, which is this element of playfulness in the music that's constructed using music, theater, and integration with technology. Your refined skill set really hides how each element is done. So we are kind of left with just this sense of magic, and it's sometimes hard to understand what actually goes on underneath. So I think this is sort of the core of my question that's going to come up in this next bit. So do you mind sort of unpacking sort of this mystery that's underneath this piece and performance for us?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and I think that's, in a way, that's a lot of what the goal is, I think, in this work and a number of other works that have sort of followed into this vein, is building up that sense of mystery. And I think part of it is really the connection that can happen between media. I think sometimes when we, and this is what draws me to using multiple media in projects, is because sometimes when we're just working in one medium, we start to take for granted some of the relationships that exist in there. The sense that like, oh well, we think of them only in terms of that medium. So we think about, if it's a purely musical piece, we're thinking harmony, we're thinking counterpoint, we're thinking melody, rhythm, all these sorts of things, and it's less obvious to be thinking about these other, perhaps broader categories of expression, of sort of storytelling or narrative or relationships and things like that. And so I'm really drawn to using multiple media so that I can play them off of each other and start setting up relationships that hopefully in an audience's mind starts getting them to be thinking about these sort of larger possibilities, or the sense of trying to figure out what's going on and how that engages a mental process that's just outside of a traditional sort of music reception brain, or even a like theater reception brain. And so, yeah, in this piece, I think I do have all of these elements are present. There's the technology is sort of existing both as a way, a sort of a mystery, this thing we don't really know or don't have full control over, and there's this sort of this othering sort of voice to it. So here, literally, that there's this electronic, recorded voice that's sort of telling commands that we kind of understand but kind of don't, and it's kind of imposing but we're kind of not sure why. And then same way, some of the electronics and the technology, like robotic instruments that are kind of playing themselves, is sort of this idea of this other, so that you have the musicians that are playing and they have control and agency, but that at some point the system sort of starts talking back or taking over. And so these instruments that they had been playing start playing themselves, albeit in a fairly minimal form, with the exception of the instrument sort of towards the end there that Russell was playing, where it's like it's playing itself, but he's intervening through reconfiguring what keys are in what location, so the human sort of is kind of working back against the system and the machine, so to speak, there. So yeah, I mean, there's the oh yeah, go ahead.
The system always wins.
System always wins.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that really comes, I've been drawn to in a lot of works, and thinking in, I think that's present to some extent in the other piece that we'll look at in a little while, the difference engine. And then as well, a number of other projects that I've done since then, I keep coming back to that sort of control, and where the, what's generating the idea. Does the person generating the idea end up having full control over everything, or is there something else? And then there's that interplay between that. certainly that happens in the piece recently that Aiyun and I have worked on, Windward, this bass drum piece with the video projected on the head of the bass drum. There's a lot of that control and agency and sort of puppet master sort of relationship that at play.
So can you talk a little bit about the lighting that we see in the piece and how that was controlled?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that piece was, from my memory, is that a lot of it is that is more like DIY lighting, so to speak. So we had a control box. I think we lovingly called it the brain.
The brain.
The brain, which
Very
turned
difficult to get on an airplane.
Oh, that was really tough flying with that thing.
Yeah, and it turns out it was not such a smart brain after all. But a lot of these things are, like with, again, like 14 years of looking back, it could be done a lot easier and a lot more efficiently now than it was then. And the resources of how to learn how to do it and all that stuff is so much more available. It's sort of exciting to see the potential now. But so yeah, there was basically a brain that had a microcontroller that was connected to a computer. So you'd send messages. I believe in that case it was via Max MSP. Sent messages to this device that then acted as a gate to turn on and off the various lights, and the same similar system would work to gate the actuators that would strike the various instruments, which were solenoids, so little things that would give a little strike and sort of pretty simply applied. So they were direct, like they directly strike the keys or the surface that was sounding. And the lights were that there were those blue lights that were built into the instruments, sort of slit drum style instruments that I had built, so that it would have sort of a bit of a more of a atmosphere that it would create, as well as be able to sort of light various regions. I think there was maybe 6 stations in the setup across in sort of an arc across the stage. And then they also each had a light that was an LED built in that would point up and light the performer behind them when they were standing and performing that. And I think it was problematic and buggy, but ultimately it worked pretty well. It was trying to achieve some ease in the sense of having a unified system that was controlling it and not having to rely significantly on the lighting of the environment that you were going to be in, which is I think maybe less of a problem now, but is always still sort of a challenge, because most times when you get into a performance space for music anyway, you don't go in with like a 2-day tech where you're like, okay, tell me what lights you want and let's set up all the cues. And it's often you're in, same day, and they basically have go-to plots that you can work with. So it was trying to make theatrical lighting basically available in musical spaces, was sort of the underlying part of that.
You can just say, turn the lights off.
Turn the lights off.
Yeah.
You turn the lights off? Great, thank you.
Yeah, well, from the documentation, I thought it was extremely successful, and in sort of creating different space within the concert stage. Mm-hmm. So we have prepared actually a couple slides from the score for our discussion. Should we have a look at that?
Sure. Yeah, so let's see. It looks like this is the whistle stop 1 at the beginning of the piece. And just sort of highlights a little bit of the, a few things. Integration of the lights. So you can see above the musical notation, there's lights fading from sort of all on to all dark that coincide with gestures. The idea of sort of a light coming on and then someone doing something, or someone doing something and the light going off, and that's just sort of integral, I think, to a lot of my that language here of, okay, so I have lights and I have performers. How can I make that into a sort of a language, so that then becomes play, that people start playing things and then the light goes out right before a penultimate hit or an ultimate hit, sort of undercutting the musical expression or playing with it in unexpected ways like that.
And then we also have the next slide, which is whistle stop number 3. Yes.
Yeah, and this is sort of the virtuosic tour de force of this of this piece, in a way. There was one of these things that's well, I think there are a number of examples of this that just so kudos to Aiyun and Russell so much on this of me giving them things that maybe in like when you say them or you think of them as ideas, they seem like, oh yeah, that seems doable, that seems simple in a way, but the practicalities were very challenging. So this is that idea of it's kind of like a sight gag, really, like a from an old silent film or something, where this musical pattern, just this ascending 6-note pattern, is played throughout for like sort of the first half of the piece until it switches, but giving you this repetitive pattern, but how it's being executed is cycled through the performers, so that their hand patterns become very different than the musical patterns. And so they're playing these very complicated looking things, but in the end, it's always is sort of as this ongoing continuum.
You could have chosen the other way. Hand patterns remain the same. Music sounds very difficult.
Yeah.
But we learned so much. We learned so much, Aiyun.
It's true. It's really true.
I mean, this was hard.
It was hard, yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's the movement where the two of you play a single snare roll together, where the other hand is playing the cowbell.
Yeah.
I mean, that's virtuosic chamber playing. That's awesome.
I don't even know if that was. Did we write down the moves at some point? I mean, I think
we did it as a video.
Yeah, that's right.
We recorded a video.
Yeah.
So this is another thing. This one. I don't think we had the score for this, and that's because, or not to show today, because it's basically text instructions that tells the idea behind things and roughly how to do some specific cues that would happen in that section with the snare drum. But a lot of that just had to really be choreographed, both because I didn't know it. That was one of those things that like, can you guys like roll together? Maybe we can try. And so you guys really figured out a method to make it happen. And so as a part of that, then we worked, and the two of you ended up choreographing, like how are you going to make this kind of fight scene happen while maintaining a role between as much as possible and undercutting each other. And yeah, really, really amazing.
I'm always thinking about the roll. Like when we're doing that, I'm like, is it smooth? But then you're like,
yeah. I do still remember that last, like the melody that we memorized for the last like fight gesture. It was bum 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 dum bum 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 or something like that.
Totally. We detuned one of the Almglocken as a result of like playing this piece, because in the last part you're just hitting a lot. So that's nice. But oh man, this piece hurts though. Remember, if you miss, you actually hit the other person.
Yeah.
Well, that was awesome. Well, I think it's let's turn to our second piece of discussion today. So this piece was written for Young and Wire, the different engine. And for this one, we're going to show the score first. This is a piece from 2011 to 2012. Who would like to talk about the story behind the commission and the premiere?
Well, I think Russell and I so much enjoyed working on Whistle from Above that we were like, we should find a way to work with David again and expand on that, just expand it into the ensemble. So it was, another natural kind of progression there.
Mm-hmm. We hadn't, like, I think you made mention about this, Aiyun, like with Whistle from Above, like Yarn Wire really hadn't like gotten too much traction, but by this point it was kind of more of the focus, and then the duo started doing less work, and so it was like, well, yeah, we got to bring David into this project too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great. So the first slide we're going to show from the score is the stage setup. And David, I kind of recognize this stage setup. This is some of the material that you have used in your more recent work, especially I think the use of the projector from the rear, from behind. I think that is something that you use quite often.
Yeah, and I think this was probably one of the first pieces that I really did this, and it was really one of the first pieces that started to incorporate video, or like traditional video in a way, into the performance. And so it was exploring a lot of new techniques and a lot of new tools on that end, of this sort of developing a visual world of animations and sort of proto animations. And so yeah, this projection setup was done in such a way so that the performers could be both in front of and behind the screen, and that you could see there was so when they're behind the screen, their shadow can be present there, and then they can interact with the projected images, and that's something that then carried on into another piece significantly with Terry Longshore. I did a piece called Penumbra that extends that to 3 screens, so a really wide aspect ratio format. There, the performance is entirely behind, so you're just seeing shadows and sort of emerging out of nothingness into interaction with the video. So a lot of that, it's like laying the language for some of these later pieces in this work. And that also then was exploring in this piece, as we'll see in some of the excerpts, using we had these small webcams that were they're basically security cameras that again I think this piece probably suffered from an overambitious sort of technological approach. It's like, oh, we can make this happen, we can make this happen, and just amazing shout out to you all about making this happen, because you ended up doing the premiere in, I forget what, I think it was 2012. And I was unable to make it out for it, and dumping a super tech heavy premiere on an ensemble without the composer being there to like freak out on their own and take care of all the stuff that's not working was, just amazing that how that you were able to make it happen like that. So and there are lessons to learn from that, in subsequent works and maybe future collaborations if we get the chance to do that, of how to do things a little more easily. So anyway, that was just to say that there's some webcams that were controllable by the computer, both so you could see into the ensemble in a way at a couple different locations, but they also would move and had some pan tilt stuff that was happening throughout the performance. That was integrated with sort of the choreography. And yeah, the overall the piece, and maybe this will lead us into one of the next slides, is sort of structured around, like how I kind of took the idea of the quartet and how do I want to deal with the quartet of 2 percussion, 2 piano, and obviously there's these different pairings in there, and I sort of went with this realm of sort of what I was thinking of as archetypal relationships of the sort of brother relationship, of the sort of collaboration but also competition happening, sort of a lover relationship, and then so there's a number of scenes that take these types. So here we're seeing the 2 lovers 2. There was a number of instances, so the 2 lovers would come back, spread out over time. The 2 brothers would come back over time, and then interspersed with more solo and full ensemble episodes. And so here's some language, that continues with that idea of sort of theatricalizing musical performance. The pianists are kind of occupy the same bench on one piano, but are always kind of tumbling over each other, and the music does that, so that you see these arrows just sort of dramatically point that out, that they're going at different speeds, so that one person's working from the top end of the piano down, and the other person's doing the same, but at asynchronous methods. So sometimes they're going in parallel, sometimes they're chasing over, and then they have to overlap each other and do laps around the piano bench, and hilarity such as that. Which is then.
Should we have a look at the Two Brothers excerpt, and also cue up the one for the lover portrait number 2?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, let's take a look at those from the scores. So there's some similar language on the brothers, and this is the second one. Number 1 has a little bit more explicit gestural musical gestures that were called for. but they're really as in with a lot of my music, I'm open to and work with performers on improvising. And so those specific musical gestures were there to give an idea of the type of gestures that I was after, that then in other iterations in the Two Brothers 2, 3, 4, etc., they kind of apply that manner of playing in then these specific instances. So giving them different changing constraints about how they are, what the timing that they're using to traverse the percussion landscape here, which was this kind of arc of instruments that went from upstage down to the downstage. And again, at the same time, or one going faster than another, staying in sync versus not. All those things get articulated as the score emerges from beginning to the end of the piece.
And those numbers were stations along that arc.
Yeah.
There's like down to a bass drum kind of anchoring the bottom of that percussive arc.
Yeah, and I think there was the overall percussion setup was, so each of these stations would have an area where you could have a little bit more variety, and then each of those stations was then separated by a sort of a linkage that you could and then head down to the next one, whether it was a guiro or I forget exactly what all the options that you guys came up with, but those kind of linkages that sort of traverse down.
Mm-hmm. So would Russell and Aiyun like to talk about sort of this experience of putting the piece together without the composer, and how you guys navigated basically putting this piece together?
I think we had the advantage, Russell and I did at least, of having worked with David a lot on Whistle. And so the kind of competitive brother relationship was, I think it felt somewhat close to me, coming from that kind of like snare drum movement in Whistle, where there is this sort of like competition, musical competition it's a little bit slapstick, but a little bit serious and kind of austere. So I felt lucky to have that past experience. Although I think, like most things, anything that's notated in a score, there can be like pages of explanation, but 2 minutes of a composer speaking about it really illuminates a lot. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that was great. Like, where we were, I was able to be there to come and do some workshopping with you prior to the premiere.
Yeah,
sort of to help build up the piece and sort of and get it going in a good direction.
Yeah, I feel like, you trusted us with. I remember getting packages in the mail of like the webcams and things, and I appreciate that you trusted us with setting things up and plugging it in, and that's a little bit of a danger as a percussionist or musician when you know how to do the tech too, sometimes but it's also for me, but it's also good because then you don't have to rely all the time, although I'm sure I sent you plenty of scared texts like what's going on, but I think with this piece, if I can offer a difficulty, it was that, when we did Whistle, you were there and you helped guide us through the piece, not just tech-wise, but, you really helped us shape it. Even though we came up with the choreography and the fight, whatever, like we did it all together. And for the premiere of Difference Engine, while we knew how to run it, they're the little things that I feel could make it like even better, like specific lighting placement, pacing, gesture, what is our character? Do we not have a character? All those little minute things that are the next step were really hard to achieve because we didn't have that same time. But, even though that would be an obstacle normally, because we've worked with you before, we were able to make some like informed assumptions and kind of create it. So yeah, I mean, that's the benefit of working with someone over years, right? But,
yeah. I concur completely, and that would be kind of the next level to take that piece. And I think it was a great, in a way, it's like a great experiment, and I think I grew a lot through working on that piece. And I think it posed obviously some challenges, or like pushed you guys in some different ways. And it's one of those things that sort of an interesting retrospective relationship with that piece, I think. And it's one I haven't thought about too much in the real recent, in the recent past. And so it's been nice to sort of re-enter it and look at it again and evaluate in a kind of more objective way what's happening, outside of all the challenges, but like really as a piece, how is it working and what's successful and what's not. And I think there's some good things in there, and I think there's some things that could be improved from a compositional standpoint. But I think that I think that there's some interesting connections. I think just about the overall structure of this way of sort of a nonstop alternation between different scenes. And it's sort of like you see this and then you get interested in it for a minute, but then you're distracted over to this other thing. And so it was a very episodic structure. And that's kind of both the really intriguing thing, but also one of the really challenging things as to how to pull like these episodes together into a larger continuous sort of emotive experience. So it all just sort of happens and is believed in a way from the audience perspective.
Should we have a look at the excerpts that we picked?
Yeah, let's do that. So maybe we start with the beginning of the piece excerpt. This gives a little intro for the first minute and 45 seconds or so. Yeah, nice. And just a very quick aside, remembering the date that was on that reminded me, okay, now I remember explicitly why I was not there, which was that my first son was born 2 weeks later, and we were already into sort of a due date range.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's what that was.
Is that a good reason? No, I'm joking.
That's a great reason.
Great reason, of course.
Yeah.
No.
I love that video. It's not that long ago, but like there's video and then like the security cam video comes in of it's so cool. Like playing with the perception.
Yeah, it's kind of that idea of trying to have the webcam, video camera sort of nestled into the environment, and you kind of emerge into that space, and trying to give an alternate sort of nested perspective, sort of almost like from a perspective from the instrument, looking back at the performers that are playing it.
So how many cameras were used in that show? It looks to me there were like at least 5, but perhaps more.
So there were two. I think there was a 2-camera shoot for like the documentation, and then built in for the performance there was, I think, three to five. I don't remember exactly. I know there was at least one or two on the percussion setup, maybe one on both ends. So that might have been two. I think there were two on the piano, and there might have been one sort of a floor one. If I can't quite remember.
And how many technicians did you use for that show? Was it one person or two? One person deal with sound and one person deal with the camera switch.
I think it was all Russell.
Yeah.
But that, David, you build very robust patches. As robust as Max MSP can be.
Yeah, it was relatively robust, but yeah, it was all automated so that the program that was running would tell which camera to show. It'd bring it up, and it would manage all the video. It would manage. I forget, was the lighting, was that the DMX lighting?
Yeah, the dimmer.
Okay. Yep. So we had a dimmer pack, and lighting that was then controlled that way. That's right. So that was controlled via all the same system. So it was one of those things like it should work, and it worked most of the time. Yeah. Occasionally there were hiccups and whatnot. But
amazing. Should we watch a bit more?
Yeah, let's watch some more.
Let's watch the rest of the excerpts, so then we can have a proper discussion after and not run out of time. Yes.
So this next one is from the Two Lovers 2. So this gives you, we saw the score of this just a moment ago.
Mm-hmm. We're having a little trouble finding the spot, but it's coming.
Okay, no problem.
Next.
the animations and images of the boats and birds were overlaid on top of that. So you were seeing that on the screen that would be projected in the performance space.
I think, Russell, were you holding a camera?
Yeah, maybe.
And a flashlight or something?
I know you guys had flashlights.
Did we have headlamps? No, I think we nixed that. Maybe we just like
sort of a pen light, kind of investigating. So this was a place. It was called the Battle at Sea, and just the end scene of the whole piece, and all four performers on the piano. So the two percussionists were playing the piano more percussively, and then also sort of investigating it with the lights. And I forget if the camera originally was going to be panning, tilting on its own. I don't remember if it did or not, or if you ended up just holding the camera to do that.
I feel like we just held it. There was like some.
I wouldn't be
surprised. Remember those cameras. USB extensions on them and everything.
Back ordered.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Well, I just think there's such an amazing amount of material in that piece. It's fantastic. Yeah. Well, before we wrap up today, I thought I would ask everybody, what's the next project that you'll be making?
With David? I don't know. Hey, David, we're doing another.
So David, what are you writing now?
Well, let's see. Right now, I'm turning from having done some more sort of percussion work recently to the next big project I'm working on is a solo project, or at least starting off as a solo project for myself. So it's a working on a robotic puppet stage. So there's a lot of stuff that's similar in ways, but building something that's going to be transportable and has a screen built into it that allows these little puppets to be sort of controlled robotically, and then there's projected environments that are happening behind them, but on a lot sort of smaller scale, so that the entire stage is about 6 feet wide, just a foot and a half tall or something like that. With the idea of creating these more sort of intimate performance opportunities. It's something that I was sort of drawn to a while back, and then I sort of abandoned it. But then now in this sort of pandemic / post-pandemic environment, it sort of feels like it really makes sense to me of creating small, intimate performance environments that might be, me finding a space where I can do this, and it's just 5 to 10 people there watching this performance, rather than thinking big stage, big like showstopper kind of things. A little bit more like street corner performance almost. So that's awesome. Where my brain is currently working on is some projects related to that, but definitely want to revisit some work that's inspired by these two pieces that we developed together a number of years ago.
Did Alexander Calder have like a little like circus that he traveled with when he was?
Mm-hmm.
That just reminded me. I don't know anything about it.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah. That's all. Those sorts of things have always been fascinating to me. The miniature, playing with scale, that sort of puppetry idea of me controlling things, whether it's through technology or other ways.
Awesome.
And what's next for Young and Wire?
I think, we have a show at the Time Spans Festival in the summer. I think that's kind of and actually we have our institute that's coming up. That's the next thing. That's in a couple weeks, actually. Yep. And there should be some nightly performances, and we're going to be joined by some amazing participants from around the world, both, performers and composers. Yeah. And you, Aiyun?
I'm also hosting a festival next, so I'm directing Soundscape. So that's happening in July. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation. Thank you for those who have tuned in. I'm Aiyun Huang. I'm here with Russell, Aiyun, and David.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for being here, and thanks to those of you who are watching. Please remember to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss another episode. There's only going to be 2 more. Next week, we'll be joined by Chris Burns to talk about his piece, Close Quarters. And then in 2 weeks, we're going to air a discussion that we had with George Crumb and some of the original performers of Music for a Summer Evening. So don't miss that. Thanks everyone again. It was really awesome to check out these pieces, and great to see you all.
Thank you.